The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has visited the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza. He called for it to be opened so that aid can reach Palestinians. Gaza is currently experiencing severe shortages of fuel, food and medicines. The United Nations says more than 2 million people are at risk of dehydration and waterborne diseases. Now, aid is currently piling up at the Rafah border crossing, but it is not being allowed into the territory. The United Nations has called for aid to return to pre-conflict levels of 100 trucks a day. Speaking at the border crossing, the UN chief said the difficult situation required extraordinary humanitarian measures.
Unfortunately, this is not a normal humanitarian operation. It's an operation in a war zone. And that is the reason why I have appealed for a humanitarian ceasefire. Not that I consider that humanitarian ceasefire is a precondition for humanitarian delivery. We don't want to punish the Gaza people twice. First, because of the war, and second, because of the lack of humanitarian aid. But it is clear that humanitarian ceasefire would make things much easier and much safer for everybody.
OK, let's cross straight to Tanya Kremer, our correspondent in Tel Aviv. Tanya, tell us, why has it been so difficult to open the Rafah border crossing and to let the aid get through into Gaza?
Well, I think we just heard it from the UN Secretary-General himself. It's an extremely complicated situation in an active war zone, and there need to be all the actors that need to agree on opening this crossing. We understand that under US pressure, mediated by the US President Joe Biden himself, as he has said, the border crossing, together with mediating between Egypt and Israel, the border crossing should open to get those trucks that have been waiting there for days into Gaza, but this hasn't happened yet. There were expectations that there might be some opening today. We understand that in Israel, from sources here, there's still political considerations and implications that are hindering this, but also from Egyptian sources, the situation is extremely difficult. There's still Israeli airstrikes also in southern Gaza. There have been airstrikes in the area of the crossing. They say also that roads need to be repaired before trucks can go through. So it is a very complicated and volatile situation where different actors, have to agree on going ahead with this.
The UN Secretary-General also made a very clear point of calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. Is that likely at all?
It doesn't look very likely at this point, if it's already so difficult to open this border crossing for goods. We are not even talking about opening the other part of this crossing to open it up for people. There was some point in the past 2 weeks that we've been seeing that people with dual nationality or foreign nationals, Palestinians, could maybe be evacuated through this crossing. Now, this has been all closed now for the past 2 weeks, so it's so important, to get people out and get the humanitarian aid in. And for the moment, it will be very difficult also for the humanitarians, if this border crossing is open and the trucks come in, also to distribute it. It's a major challenge. We understand that, according to the Israeli army, they defined a very small area in Gaza now in the south as a safe zone where people could go to take shelter, because also airstrikes are continuing. There's also sporadic rocket fires that are coming out of Gaza, but people I talked to in Gaza said it's the bombardment of Gaza that is so difficult to endure, because people are really fearing for their lives and they can't really go from one place to the next. So that will also be difficult then to deliver this aid, and this is certainly also a major challenge for the humanitarian organizations. But for the moment, of course, first of all, they need to focus on getting this aid into Gaza.
Tanya, we're going to come back to you in just a moment. We're going to take a look now, a closer look at the situation on the ground in Gaza. As we were just hearing, Israeli forces struck targets in the Gaza Strip. That was happening into the early hours of Friday morning, including in the south of the territory, where Israel had told Gazans to head for their own safety. Hamas rockets shot back into Israel as well overnight. And all of this is happening as Palestinians wait for relief efforts to begin to cross the border from Egypt. Let's take a look.
They are ready and waiting. A percentage of these aid trucks is supposed to be allowed through the Rafah crossing, the only crossing into Gaza not controlled by Israel. 20 in all, aid trucks for Gaza.
2.5 million people that need assistance. 20 trucks is a drop in the ocean of need right now in Gaza.
On the other side of the Rafah crossing, there is mayhem and despair. Even if southern Gaza is where Israel told northern Gazans to go for safety's sake. Heavy airstrikes in Khan Yunis in the south meant the overflowing Nasser hospital took in even more wounded for critical care.
There's no safety. There's nowhere safe in Gaza. You have to be ready to die and to just stay in your house.
When there is a threat originating or being conducted against Israel from the south, then we will strike, absolutely.
Israel's army will soon move into the Gaza Strip, Israel's defense minister told the troops massing on its border. I promise you that whoever sees Gaza now from afar will see it from the inside. Good luck. An Israeli ground operation will likely focus at first on the north, with Hamas expected to put up fierce resistance. All of that pushing even more Gazans southward, in need of food, water, medical supplies. And back on the other side of the Rafah crossing, aid supplies stream into a nearby airport, destined to join the backup, waiting to get into southern Gaza.
OK, let's go back to our correspondent Tanya Kremer, who's in Tel Aviv. Tanya, the Israeli ground operation that we were just hearing about in that report into Gaza is expected. Do we know why it hasn't started yet?
Well, from what we understand, there are certainly strategic implications here and considerations why it hasn't started yet. I mean, it's expected that it's not an if, but when it will happen. We won't, of course, know when it will happen beforehand. There's a certain element of surprise. We understand from the army that there's certain reorganizing, regrouping around the border where there is mass deployment. You know, all the tanks, you can see that there's a closed military area all around the Gaza Strip. So we are waiting for this to happen. In the meantime, you know, the massive airstrike campaign is continuing, also with artillery fire and from the naval forces in the Mediterranean Sea on Gaza. But there are also other considerations, because Israel is also looking towards the border with Lebanon in the north of Israel. And we heard this morning again another town in the north of Israel has been given an evacuation order, Kiryat Shmoni, so that people should leave. I think there's a big concern here that this might become a wider conflict, that the Lebanese militant Shiite group Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran, might join the war. They have threatened that if a ground offensive will happen. So there are a lot of concerns here also, and that would implicate also on the strategic decisions here of the army when to do the ground offensive.
And Tanya, can I ask you about the hostages taken by Hamas? Is there any word at all on the fate of those hostages being held?
Well, there was one video released about one young Israeli woman this week from the Hamas militant group, showing her somewhere in Gaza. We also heard from the Israeli army today another confirmation that over 200 hostages are now being confirmed. Their families have been notified, because what has been going on here in the past 2 weeks is that a lot of families do not know what happened to their loved ones. Those who have not seen their relatives being taken away on those very harrowing videos But the army now said that over 20 of those hostages that are confirmed to be in Gaza are children under the age of 18. 10 to 20 are over 60. Most of them are alive, but there are also apparently some that have died, but their bodies were taken to Gaza. Again, they also stressed that between 100 and 200 people are still missing. And we've been visiting also the place at a military base where those bodies are being, where there are forensic teams looking at those bodies. It's a very gruesome identification process going on to notify the families what happened to their loved ones there.
DW correspondent Tanya Pikrema, thank you so much for that update.